right here, right now, to introduce Lisa Small is the curator of costumes and textiles at the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, Jill D'Alessandro.
Thank you, and it's wonderful to collaborate with the JCC, and thank you for inviting me on this auspicious evening. Lisa Small has been curator of exhibitions at the Brooklyn Museum since 2011. She was the coordinating curator for the museum's presentation of Jean-Michel Autinel, My Way, in 2012, and The Fashion World of Jean-Paul Gaultier, From the Sidewalk to the Catwalk, in 2013. Perhaps some of you might have seen it when it was here at the Fine Arts Museums. Good. She has served as curator as well as editor for the exhibition catalog, Killer Heels, The Art of the High Heel Shoe, which will be her topic tonight. The exhibition was on view in Brooklyn from September of 2014 to March 2015 and is now embarking on a 4-venue tour. I think it opens in Albuquerque this May. Currently, she is coordinating curator of the Rise of Sneaker Culture, opening this summer in Brooklyn, and she is also co-curator of the upcoming Brooklyn Museum traveling exhibition, French Moderns, Monet to Matisse, 1850 to 1950. I think we all need a trip to New York. Small received her BA from Colgate University and an MA in Arts Administration from NYU, as well as an MA and MPhil in Art History from SUNY, the City University of New York. She has also taught art history and the history of photography at Hunter College, Brooklyn College, and the School of the Visual Arts. Please help me give a warm welcome to Lisa Small.
Thank you. Got to put my glasses on for this. Okay. Thank you so much for having me here. I am really, really delighted to speak with you tonight about Killer Heels, the exhibition that I curated for the Brooklyn Museum that, as Jill mentioned, is now traveling to 4 other museum venues in the United States. And I think the closest one to San Francisco might be Palm Springs, where it's opening this September. So if you have a trip to Palm Springs coming up, you can see it there. So, I'm going to go back to this for a second. Organizing Killer Heels was a lot of fun as well as a really great challenge for me because my background is not in fashion or fashion history, but rather in art history. But one of the wonderful things about taking on a project like this is how much you can learn about something that you see maybe all the time or very frequently, but don't really think too much about. As a material artifact, a designed object, and a layered cultural symbol in narratives of desire, transformation, empowerment, and play, the high heel offers a valuable lens through which to examine social history. In my talk this evening, I will first present an overview of the history of the high heel, and then share a little bit about how the exhibition was organized in Brooklyn, showing some images and video as well, so you can get a sense of how it looked there. Loved and despised, coveted and mocked, high heels are perhaps the most polarizing and intriguing article of fashion. They have remained key elements in the social construction of femininity and in debates about power and objectification, all while maintaining their currency as symbols of high status. In the West, the history of high heels and other elevated footwear began more than 2,000 years ago with platform shoes, the oldest form of elevated footwear. Evidence of thick-soled shoes, and here we go here. Evidence of thick-soled sandals dates as far back as the 6th century BC, as can be seen in this Greek kore statue, a common type of sculpture meant to represent an idealized woman. The male versions of these sculptures, these same statue types rather, were always depicted nude, which suggests that fashionable adornments, including thick-soled shoes like she's wearing, were already understood as signifying the feminine. We see this as well in this tiny, and it's really tiny, it looks enormous here. It's a tiny 1st century BC sculpture of Aphrodite wearing towering platform sandals worthy of Lady Gaga. Such elevated shoes were considered slightly exotic, having made their way into Greece from the East, or the Orient, as they called it, those foreign regions and cultures that the Greeks looked upon with a mix of hostility, fear, and fascination. The Greeks associated the Orient with excessive luxury and adornment, especially in relation to fashions like elevated footwear that could be deemed deceptive in some way. In Greek culture, the Orient was constructed as effeminate and frivolous, characteristics also attributed to women in general. It is thus quite interesting to remember that the origins of the Greek goddess Aphrodite can be traced back to Near Eastern female deities like Ishtar and Isis, and moreover, to discover that platform sandals like these, versions of which we know were worn by actual women as well as statues like this, these types of shoes were sometimes referred to as Persians, after the Greeks' Eastern adversary. This designation conjures the shoe's aura of fashionable exoticism, but also the way that elevated shoes were connected to notions of female beauty, seduction, and excess. Before leaving the ancient world, I want to mention just quickly 2 other instances of elevated shoes from that period. First are the raised sole shoes worn by classical male actors in both ancient Greece and Rome, the only circumstance where men would wear such shoes at that time. Used for greater visibility while performing in the round, these shoes enhance the wearer's stature physically and symbolically, and the taller the platform, the more important the character, which is an equation still very much in play for proponents of high heels. The other form of ancient, ancient form of thick-soled shoes were the sandals that ancient Roman men and women wore in baths to protect their feet from the wet, heated floors. Roman habits and fashions spread with their empire, and bathing culture was one that went on to become quite significant throughout the Islamic Eastern Mediterranean. There, the modest, stilted wooden clogs of ancient Rome evolved to an extreme form for women known as the kabkab, which you see an example here. These extraordinary shoes were apparently worn to navigate the slick-tiled floors of the bathhouse, although I have never understood how these shoes would make it less likely to slip and fall, be that as it may. They remain symbols of Oriental luxury, exoticism, and sensuality for centuries in the European imagination, as these 2 paintings from the 18th century and the 19th century show. And this painting on the right, the painting by Jerome, is right here in San Francisco at the Legion of Honor, so you can go look at that in person. The figures displayed in this detail from a relief on the 12th century Cathedral of Vézelay, which was associated with the Crusades, wear headgear and high shoes that were meant to identify them as being from the Holy Land, indicating that such shoes were still associated with the Orient in the European mind. We can see again thick-soled shoes as a signifier of the East in many religious paintings. For example, in Hugo van der Gogh's Portinari altarpiece from the 1470s, you can see, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. There we go, right there. Joseph's thick-soled wooden clogs. By around the 15th century, such stilted or clog-like shoes, also sometimes called pattens, had been adopted into European fashion as yet another instance in what would be an ongoing fascination and engagement with Eastern exoticism. In Van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait, shoes like this, and you see his and hers, there in the details, shoes like this, along with fine clothes, furnishings, and even the important, you can barely see them, oranges on the windowsills, signified the couple's wealth and status in a world of international trade and sartorial sophistication. It was in Renaissance Venice, however, that one of the most challenging and extreme versions of high platform shoes rose, and I mean rose, to prominence. Venice was profitably poised at the crossroads of the busy oceanic trade routes linking Europe, the Americas, and Asia, and saw an unprecedented influx of wealth during this period. And one of the favorite status symbols of its newly rich inhabitants was a flamboyant, teetering shoe called a chopine. Worn exclusively by women, this platform shoe consisted of decoratively embroidered cloth or leather uppers attached to a wooden or cork pedestal. Most chopines like these have only one pedestal or platform, but some also had two. Fashion influences circulated around Europe, and although it is difficult to be certain, research suggests that chopines did derive in some way from Eastern sources. Certainly, they bear some resemblance to the high, stilted shoes that we've just seen worn by women in the Ottoman Empire and the Mediterranean basin that were also frequently depicted in these very popular 16th century European prints that were all about the costumes and habits of people around the world. Variants of the chopine were worn across Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries, in Spain and Italy particularly, but it is in Venice that they attained the highest profile, some of them as tall as 20 inches. Yeah, let you absorb that for a minute. Their notoriety as an accoutrement of feminine privilege spread throughout Europe, and observations about them appear frequently in travelers' accounts. Many were incredulous. One foreign visitor noted that Venice's fairer sex appeared to be, quote, half flesh, half wood. No less than Shakespeare referred to them by having Prince Hamlet pronounce a female visitor to the Danish court, quote, nearer to heaven by the altitude of a chopine. It is often said that these incredible shoes were utilitarian, worn to keep women's delicate feet dry in the streets of lagoon-based Venice. However, their sumptuous materials and beautiful ornamentation tell a different story. In Venice, where the textile trade was the source of economic power, rich families used costume, particularly women's dress, to express the family's wealth and grandeur and the larger affluence of Venice as a whole. Decked out in luxurious garments, women of Venice's plutocratic ruling classes processed through the public spaces for marriage ceremonies and grand civic events, mounted like parade floats on their high chopines. And in these details, I'll draw your attention there, and of course there, and there. As these details show, attendants frequently supported the women on either side for obvious reasons. And as you're laughing, so too this was a source of great amusement for many visitors to Venice, one of whom described scenes of women wearing chopines and how, quote, thus attired they set their hands on the heads of two matron-like women to support them. 'Tis very ridiculous to see how these ladies crawl in and out of their gondola by reason of their chopines, and what dwarfs they appear when taken down from their wooden scaffolds. Although many chopines were themselves beautifully made and embellished, their significance as a means to flaunt wealth was not due to their own appearance, but rather to the extravagances that went along with them. Impractical footwear like this required costly servants, carriages, and gondolas, all of which signaled wealth and leisure. One of the most interesting things to learn about chopines is that they were purposely not visible. Floor-length skirts obscured them from view. Indeed, their concealment helped further emphasize a woman's family wealth because of the additional and very costly fabrics her dress had to contain in order to fall past her ankles and feet. Both of these images show how the presence of chopines is implied beneath the dresses by the woman's height and elongated proportions, if you look very carefully. Many 16th century accounts, almost all written by men, were highly censorious of this unnatural look. And I'm going to read you another quote, a little bit long, but I think it's interesting. Quote, women think that strutting around from this magnificent perspective makes them alluring, but true beauty consists in proper proportions. Elongating your legs with heels that are a quarter or even half an arm's length leaves you looking like a monster, with the head and torso of a child perched upon the legs of a giant. What beauty can there be in having your knees nearly where your chin should be, in being unable to take 4 steps without danger of imminent collapse, in tumbling over should you try to kneel, and being unable to arise without assistance. Although noble women wore chopines, popular images of courtesans and other so-called public women wearing them helped forge a connection between elevated feminine footwear and licentious female sexuality. In Renaissance Venice, the cost of dowries caused even wealthy families to sequester their unmarried daughters in nunneries. This led to concerns over a surplus of bachelors who might inevitably turn to sodomy. The church and state helpfully sanctioned honest courtesans who behaved as escorts for upper-class men. A courtesan had access to the noble court and moved within that very high circle. Courtesans were expected to dress like upper-class women, which meant they wore chopines. Many prints, like this movable one of a courtesan, and you're seeing the same print sort of before and then after you flip up the movable part, play a provocative game of peekaboo with chopines, clearly reinforcing the idea that these shoes, worn under full skirts and not meant to be seen, actually functioned and were understood more like underwear or foundational garments, lingerie really, which is why they began to get a sort of sexy connection to them. The true high heel emerged into Western dress at the very end of the 16th century. Like the platform, heeled footwear is thought to have originated in the Near East, specifically in Persia, where mounted cavalrymen wore heeled shoes and boots to stabilize their feet in the stirrups. At the end of the 16th century, Persia's Shah Abbas I had the largest and most powerful cavalry in the world. In 1599, he sent the first diplomatic mission to the courts of Europe in a bid to form alliances to help defeat his great enemy, the Ottoman Empire. This mission heralded a craze in Western Europe for all things Persian, especially heeled boots and shoes. Already associated with warfare and the nobility of horsemanship, heels were enthusiastically embraced first by fashion-forward aristocratic men, wanting to add a virile and exotic edge to their appearance, as in this early 17th century portrait. Throughout the 17th century, heels were an integral element in the Western male costume of privilege and monarchy, particularly at the French court. And here is Louis XIV, the Sun King, wearing red heels, which he established as an indispensable feature of his courtier's dress. And because menswear styling was a trend in women's fashion even then, women soon incorporated heels into their wardrobes. And these two shoes, the one on the left is a French pair from about 1690, and the slightly thicker heeled shoe from 1720 on the right is British. Where men's heels were straight and blocky, women's heels were more slender and curved. Delicate pointed toes peeping out beneath voluminous skirts, as in this portrait of Madame Pompadour, made a woman's foot appear dainty, which was desirable in this era of Charles Perrault's Tale of Cinderella, which dates from around this time, and high, slender heels added to her allure. As with the chopine, however, these heels could be difficult to walk in. A British rhyme, little couplet from 1753 makes this connection. It goes, "Mount on French heels when you go to a ball. 'Tis the fashion to totter and show you can fall." Their instability was due not just to their height, but to the position of the heel, which was sometimes had to be set nearly under the middle of the foot to help it from prevent it from snapping off. So if you look here, you can kind of get a sense from the side that where the heel meets the sole is pretty much right under the middle of where your foot would be. Some shoemakers also extended the heel almost like a buttress. You can see it kind of going that direction, for further stability. Ostentatiously impractical, these shoes, by their very design, again, signaled a life of leisure and privileged immobility. By sometime in the first half of the 18th century, men abandoned heels. Enlightenment philosophy developed and fostered a dichotomy around gender. Men were deemed rational, practical, and educatable. Women, you guessed it, irrational, frivolous, and uneducatable. And dress became an expression of these two different modes of perceived gender-specific behavior. Men began to wear more plain and sober clothing in a transformation that social and fashion historians have called the Great Renunciation, which is well illustrated by comparing the official portrait of Louis XIV, which we've already seen, and the one of Emperor Napoleon III from 1865. And you can see a marked decrease in the flamboyance of the outfit. Most ornament, texture, bright color, and the implied frivolity, vanity, and expense assumed by such a display were left to women. High heels, separated from their practical use in horseback riding, were considered particularly foolish and effeminate. It was at this moment in the early 18th century that fashion shifted from mainly signifying class to primarily representing gender. High heels became signifiers of femininity that were thus increasingly linked to female desirability. 18th century Rococo painters like Fragonard and Boucher were particularly adept at conveying the sexual magnetism of the high heel, the delicate backless mule especially. This is Fragonard's painting The Swing, which shows a high-heeled pink mule flying off the foot of a young woman to the delight of the man watching her from below, capturing the style's seductive and erotic power. And in his painting of a partially undressed young woman in her boudoir, the painter Boucher offers perhaps the finest visual double entendre ever to emphasize the sexual frisson of the high-heeled mule. And I will leave it to you, but give you a hint to figure that out there. The French Revolution in 1789 had a profound impact on shoe fashions. High heels were long associated with the excesses of the aristocracy, particularly in France, where high heels were lopped off like so many heads. By the early 1800s, slipper-like flats, like you can see in these images, were the prevailing fashion and would remain so for approximately 50 years. High heels inevitably rose again, and a higher heel became fashionable for women by the middle of the 19th century, fueled in part by the revival of 18th century styles, particularly the gracefully curved Louis heel seen on this shoe. That's the beautiful Louis heel. And named after the reign of King Louis XV when they were at the peak of their popularity. And this caricature that I'm showing you on the right is in reference to a popular American song from 1868 that satirized the new higher heel, the women who wore them, and the effect on their posture, which they called the Grecian bend, because the silhouette was thought to resemble how the shoulders of ancient female Greek nudes were sort of modestly rounded or hunched over. And one lyric of this song goes like this, and I'm not going to sing it, I'm just going to read it. The ladies wanting something new, as women are so prone to do, wear lofty heels upon the shoe to give them a Grecian bend. With foot so short and heel so high, they can't stand plumb if they would try, and so they think to catch the eye by means of the Grecian bend. While high and elevated shoes had long been associated with the sexually beguiling female wardrobe, the connection became even stronger and seemingly unbreakable with the advent of photography. By the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th, the high heel became an indispensable accessory in the French postcard industry, which exploited the erotic potential of photography as a medium and of high heels as a feminine attribute. And you know that the high heel, is being used here in this kind of hypersexualized way and in such an artificial way, because what's so funny about that whole trope in pornography of being mostly naked except for your shoes is that in reality, ladies, do you ever find yourself having taken everything off except your shoes or putting on your shoes first? It's just not a natural, situation that you would be in your own day-to-day life. In the 1920s, flappers further emphasized the association between heels and sex appeal with their flashy leather ankle strap heels, which were now very tantalizingly revealed between the daring raised hemlines of the era. In the 1930s, popular culture reinforced the dazzling high heel as the accessory par excellence of feminine glamour, worn by both Hollywood screen sirens like Jean Harlow, seen here, and the pulp fantasy models drawn for the covers of men's magazines. And I particularly like the one on the right because it seems like an update of Boucher's painting. Same accessory. During World War II, high heels became even more integral to images of idealized female desirability, figuring prominently in pinups like Betty Grable's famous poster, or on the sides of fighter planes where sexy painted women in heels functioned as good luck charms and spurs to victory. These types of heels, however, didn't necessarily correspond with what was in fashion at the time, or in fact, what was able to be mass-produced yet. Although women wore heels during the war, many also wore platform or wedge shoes, which designers and manufacturers had reintroduced to footwear fashion in the 1930s, the first time such shoes enjoyed popularity since the age of the chopine. And this is a gorgeous pair of Delman shoes with menswear perforations. And some, like this very colorful platform sandal, is made of jute, a kind of canvas-like material, which demonstrates how many designers during World War II, faced with the rationing of leather, were forced to experiment with new materials for their accessories. Salvador Ferragamo was particularly recognized for popularizing the wedge and the platform in the 1930s and 40s, from the flamboyant rainbow platform to the slightly more casual wedge that you see here. Ferragamo's signature deeply undercut curved wedge does evoke the silhouette of the Venetian chopine, which I've put up again for comparative purposes. And that was a style with which Ferragamo, an Italian designer, was most certainly familiar. Of course, men generally didn't like platforms, finding their thick soles and chunky heels decidedly lacking in sex appeal, at least in part because they were a bit too associated with the more sensible shoes that were worn by women who worked in factories during the war. You can see in this photograph and this great poster, which really has almost, I just put it there because I love this poster so much and what it says. We never figured you could do a man-sized job. When men returned after the war, fashion brought itself into closer alignment with men's ideas of female desirability, including higher, slender heels of the sort already depicted in advertising, pinup imagery, and even pornography. Essentially going from this, Jenny on the job in her masculine shoes, to the sort of fashion drawings from the early 50s on the right. Popular fantasy imagery fueled the demand for heels that were higher and thinner than those that could be achieved using just stacked wood. But such shoes really couldn't be produced in any quantity or with any reliability until after the war, when footwear manufacturers succeeded in inserting a stabilizing steel rod into the heel. The resulting stiletto, so called for its spiky, slender shape, quickly became synonymous with 1950s idealized femininity, as did the silhouette that it was meant to accompany, Christian Dior's curvaceous new look, which you see here in this photograph, which was unveiled just after the war to herald a return to opulence after wartime austerity. There is some debate about who invented the stiletto. Some say André Perugia, others Ferragamo or Roger Vivier. But once the structural integrity of the thin stiletto heel was assured through the use of this internal steel rod, many designers in the 50s and through the 60s experimented with variations on its profile and position. And this is a picture of Perugia's needle heel shoe, along with the patent drawings for it. And the patent drawing shows that the heel itself was actually like a flattened sliver instead of a rounded heel, a rounded sort of shape. Vivier, who designed Christian Dior's shoes for many years, contributed some of the most enduring architectural and sculptural stiletto silhouettes, including the shock heel, which curves kind of outward, and the comma heel, which curves inward. The high heel was destined to remain the iconic woman's shoe of the 20th century. However, the 1960s marked another moment, like the post-French Revolutionary period, when flatter shoes worn by waif-like models like Twiggy became an essential part of the prevailing youthquake or little girl look. And again, while this look was very popular in fashion magazines, men found the lack of heels to be, quote, tough on girl watchers, as one quote had it. But never fear, in pornography and in men's magazines, the high heel retained its popularity and erotic currency through any, fashion change. The 1970s ushered in a new revival of the platform shoe, a style that equally served the groovy post-hippie and disco crowds, and provided what some women appreciated as an extra empowering few inches, during a period when feminism was having a profound effect on society. It was also fashionable for men to wear pretty high platforms during this decade, aggressively asserting their masculinity in emulation of either glam rockers or the influential Superfly style. It's very popular. Perhaps because men also wore elevated shoes for this brief period, which was the first and possibly the last time since the 18th century that men wore shoes like this in mainstream fashion, the stiletto also made a resounding and hypersexualized comeback after the lower heels of the 60s. Fashion photographers like Guy Bourdin co-opted the vocabulary of pornography in their advertising images of high heels. And what had long been the simmering subtext burst decisively into the mainstream. High heels equals sex, an equation that shows no signs of disappearing. So, how did some of these objects and histories come together in Killer Heels, the exhibition? First, just a little bit of basic information about the exhibition. There's a shot of how it looked at the opening room in Brooklyn. The exhibition contains around 200 women's shoes that range in date from around 1600 through the present day, with most of them having been from about the past 10 years or so. The shoes are on loan from the Metropolitan Museum's Costume Institute, which was very generous not only with their own material, but of course with the objects from the renowned Brooklyn Museum costume collection, which the Met acquired from us a number of years ago. And as Jill mentioned, if you haven't already gone to the Legion of Honor to see High Style, I highly recommend that you do so. In fact, there are a few shoes in that show that I wanted for my show, but couldn't have because they were in that show. So you can go see them there. I also borrowed shoes from the Bata Shoe Museum in Toronto, the Ferragamo Museum in Florence, and from more than 50 different fashion houses and designers. For Killer Heels, I wanted to focus on the archetypal forms of the elevated shoe. The stiletto, the original Killer Heel, an icon of fantasy and fetish. The wedge, a melding of height and stability. And the platform, the oldest form, as we've seen, of elevated shoe, and the one that has encompassed some of the most extreme designs in footwear history. I was drawn to designs that explore the sculptural, architectural, and artistic possibilities of the high heel, often using innovative or unexpected materials or techniques. Displaying surprising structures and shapes, many push the limits of functionality and even legibility, subverting expectations of what a high heel is or how it can look. Some are traditional, but many, like the few that I've put up here, are more conceptual or appear not to have been designed according to the typical fashion codes for idealizing femininity. The exhibition also featured a number of films and videos, which brought movement, sound, and narrative into the galleries. There are 6 short films about high heels that we commissioned specifically for the exhibition by an eclectic group of contemporary artists and fashion photographers and filmmakers. I just have a few stills, although we'll show some clips in a moment. Ghada Amir and Reza Farkhunda, Zach Gold, Stephen Klein, Nick Knight, Marilyn Minter, and up there, Rashad Newsom. These 6 diverse films consider the meanings and mythologies of the high heel through the medium that helped establish its prominence in popular culture. There were also other video clips from movies and newsreels shown on smaller screens throughout the galleries that provided extra context for certain of the shoes. And I'll be showing clips, as I said, of all the commissioned films as well as a few of the extra bits of footage that we had. So faced with such a rich history as I've very, sort of briefly outlined, but with the usual curatorial constraints of budget, space, and available loans, I realized that it would be difficult to do justice to a full chronological history of the high heel. But this was fine, because the more research I did, the more interested I became in the consistency of certain vocabularies, certain design vocabularies, and how shoemakers and designers have, over the years, constantly reinvented these basic forms with such astonishing variety. Earlier styles reemerge, tweaked and updated, but with their fundamental silhouettes still recognizable. Old becomes new, becomes old, becomes new, which of course is the story of fashion in a nutshell. And as I looked at hundreds and hundreds of heels, so much so I have to pause to just say that when I was working on this show, and I did a lot of work at home, and I'd be on the computer looking at so many pictures, and my husband would walk in and he said, "Tell the truth, are you shopping or are you curating?" True story. So as I looked at hundreds of heels, certain themes and ideas began to emerge around both the design and the perception of these objects, such as notions of transformation or the relationship between heels and architecture. And as I thought more about these relationships and about creating a dynamic presentation, I decided to organize the exhibition into 6 thematic sections. The sections are Revival and Reinterpretation, Rising in the East, Glamour and Fetish, Architecture, Metamorphosis, and Spacewalk. And I'm going to say a little bit more about each of those. In these 6 sections, the history of high heels is explored through a number of key historical objects, as well as, of course, through all of the didactic labels and other information. But instead of arranging them chronologically, heels from various periods were displayed adjacent to each other in order to highlight these continuities and resemblances and to connect the designs to broader cultural themes. This is a picture here of the first section, Revival and Reinterpretation. And that was the first section. It introduced the exhibition's cross-historical approach by focusing on the recurrence and the persistence of styles like the Louis heel or the platform or the early 20th century T-strap shoe. You can see, for example, in the first case here, the Italian chopines, the Venetian chopines with another, it's a little dark, you can't make it out, but it's another Ferragamo wedge that has a very similar profile. So those two were together. And then here is a detail, for example, of one of the cases that contains platforms from the 30s, the 70s, the 90s, and today. Another really exciting aspect of the installation in Brooklyn was the addition of a number of non-shoe objects from our vast and encyclopedic permanent collections. I selected 25 fine and decorative art objects, from furniture to antiquities, and placed them in dialogue with some of the heels in the exhibition. Now, the point was not to suggest a direct influence between these objects or from one thing to another, but rather to create visually striking vignettes of objects that resonated or related to each other in some way. And we introduced this strategy in this first section as well. For example, with this gorgeous Rococo revival table, which was paired with a recent Miu Miu platform, as well as a gorgeous shoe from the 1920s by Andre Perugia. So you can kind of see a shared aesthetic there. Or another beautiful silver Art Nouveau candlestick paired with some great Chanel boots. And one of my personal favorite little vignettes was the Ferragamo Rainbow platform and the ubiquitous rainbow children's stacking toy, which I learned the original design for that rainbow stacking toy dates to 1938, which is the same date as the Ferragamo shoe. So I thought they belonged together. I also hung this beautiful Giovanni Boldini painting from 1912, a painting of a very well-heeled society lady, next to a group of shoes, an original, an 18th century Louis heel that we've seen, which, by the way, that shoe, although it's not there anymore, would have been fastened with a jeweled buckle of some kind. A revival of the Louis heel by Pietro Yantorni from the early 20th century, two pairs of Blahniks, Manolo Blahniks, one from the 90s and one from like last year, 2 years ago. So it was a sort of a great multi-dimensional story about how the iconic 18th century high heel continues to be a source of inspiration, not only for its silhouette and detailing, but for its aristocratic and elite associations, which are as in play today on Madison Avenue as they were at Versailles. Now, speaking of Versailles, I had this gorgeous pair, a limited edition pair of Christian Louboutin shoes called the Marie Antoinette, which featured this gorgeous, heavily embroidered bust of the Queen wearing one of her famous wigs, sometimes that contained ships and plants and animals and things. But I paired it, as you can see here, there was a small video monitor next to the case, and I paired it with this clip from the movie Marie Antoinette. It's all about shopping. I also included, the next clip I'm going to show you is a really funny clip from 1903 out of Thomas Edison's studios called The Gay Shoe Clerk, back when gay meant something different, clearly, to show how from the very beginning of cinema, remember this is 1903, the high heel found its place as a catalyst for sexual ardor. That one has a higher heel than the first one. Very shocking. Shocking. So, yeah, that's a cute one. That is a cute one. And then I had this really fun fashion newsreel from the 1930s that features styles like the ones we had on display nearby. So again, you have to imagine there were a bunch of shoes, and then we had a small monitor. This one's also silent, but these are the kind of newsreels that would have been shown before films, and a surprising number of them dealt with fashion, like what are the latest fashions this spring. And I loved this one because it was synchronized, foot movements. And so here are just a few more shoes from that section, and I just want to call your attention to, well, this shoe is from the 90s, but I loved it because it was sort of an updated little pink mule. We had the reproduction of the Fragonard painting where the little pink mule goes flying off the woman's foot. And then this shoe, which is almost identical to the shoe that just got the gay shoe clerk into so much trouble. So it was actually right near that monitor. So the second section of the exhibition, Rising in the East, includes heel designs that show the influence of Eastern forms and motifs, as well as shoes from those cultures. So this was the section where we had the high stilted bath sandals that you see here, which we had paired with those double pedestaled chopines, along with styles from Japan and China. The Japanese geita is a sandal, and there's one right there, elevated on wooden teeth that originally kept farmers' feet from sinking into the muddy rice fields, but then, of course, the geita evolved to be one of the most common forms of footwear in Japan. And so we put this with a really funky pair of 70s, very groovy platforms from the 70s with that geita, along with this shoe by Martin Margiela, which you can't see. It's from the early 2000s, but it's one of his iconic cleft toe shoes. So there's like a little, cleft between where your big toe and the rest of your toes would be. And he called them the tabi shoes because they were inspired by the split toe socks called tabi that were meant to be worn with geita. So very tall lacquered geita like these were worn during the Edo period by the oiran, who were Japan's highest ranking courtesans. And in this case, I paired one of these very formidable shoes with 19th century prints, again from our collection, showing courtesans wearing very, very similar shoes, along with this truly extraordinary design by a young Dutch designer, Wendy Rienstra, that's sort of, again, a kind of interpretation in a funny sort of way of the toothed geita. A common sight in Edo's entertainment district was the public procession of a finely dressed oiran courtesan on her way to meet a wealthy client, because her clients were all wealthy, walking with her attendants just as the chopine-shod women in Venice had to. And the height of these geita required that the courtesans walk in a very stylized, almost figure-8 pattern, dragging and moving their feet in a very particular way, which was considered, rather alluring and sensuous. And I paired this, I had a little monitor showing a clip from a Japanese film called Sakuran, which was about the life of one of these courtesan. So signifying a woman's status and identity through elevated footwear has been a hallmark of Asian cultures for centuries. Qing Dynasty Manchu women were forbidden to bind their feet like the Han Chinese, whose bound feet connoted feminine refinement and eligibility. Instead, Manchu women wore distinctive embroidered platform shoes, which you can just sort of see two pair that we had in the show in the back here, that preserve the natural shape of the foot. These platforms were possibly influenced by the chopine, not 100% certain, but most importantly, they distinguished the Manchu culture from the Han, so shoes as a means of cultural identification. But because the shoes made it difficult to walk, they also replicated the bound foot's very halting gait, which was still considered attractive in Manchu culture. And here I just show I couldn't resist displaying them with extremely high platforms, one by Christian Louboutin and this one by Prada. And the Prada seems to be a kind of crazy, zany mashup of a thonged gaita and a high Manchu shoe, with a little bit of sort of anime kind of design thrown in for good measure. Long after the Persian platforms of antiquity that we saw, Eastern motifs, colors, and forms continued to inspire Western designs. You can see Rodarte's wedge heels that have the distinctive patterns of 17th century Ming porcelain. And because our collections are so amazing, I could bring out some Ming porcelain to put in the case with it. The graphic designs based on traditional Japanese tattoos as interpreted by Jean-Paul Gaultier in his cantilever-heeled booties. And Roger Vivier decorated this shoe with the beautiful iridescent blue feathers of the white-breasted kingfisher bird, which also famously adorned clothes and accessories in imperial China. And then just a few other designs from this section. A more beautiful Vivier for Christian Dior shoes. Pietro Yantorni. There's a number of beautiful Yantorni shoes, by the way, in the Legion of Honor show that you should go take a look at. But, they have this sort of upturned toes and intricate embroidery and beading, sort of like Turkish slippers. So the title of the next section, Glamour and Fetish, encompasses two significant and related discourses surrounding the stiletto. Since its invention in the early 1950s, Hollywood and popular culture have enshrined the stiletto as the principal sartorial signifier of idealized womanhood. Embellished with marabou feathers, lace, ruffles, crystals, or finished in glossy patent leather, the stiletto is glamour incarnate. Now, although the exhibition wasn't about famous shoes worn by famous people, that wasn't how I was making my selection, there were several in the show that I did want to include for that reason. And one you can see here in the case, these purple Vivienne Westwood platform shoes, which some of you may remember model Naomi Campbell famously tripped and fell down the runway when she wore them in that 1993 runway show. So they've become sort of very iconic in high heel falling popular culture. And then another is a pair which you can just barely see. That's it right there. It's a pair of very, very simple black stiletto Ferragamo pumps, perhaps the most common 20th century high heel silhouette. And I wanted them because they belonged to Marilyn Monroe, for whom a high heel was as essential a part of her iconic sex appeal as her hourglass figure and platinum hair. And I paired the shoes, you can see a video monitor right nearby, with a clip from one of my favorite movies that I think really made that point beautifully.
Look at that. Look how she moves. That's just like Jell-O on springs. Must have some sort of built-in motor or something. I tell you, it's a whole different sex. What are you afraid of? Nobody's asking you to have a baby. This is just to get us out of town. Once we get the flower, we'll blow this whole set.
I've seen that clip, 1,000 times, and every time I see it, I want to see the movie again. It's so good. So for some, stilettos symbolize objectification and constricting standards of beauty, while for others, they project authority and confidence. Still others consider them integral to erotic fulfillment. And long before its technical perfection in the 50s, fetish-style heels, or high-heeled boots, of the kind drawn in men's magazines, extremely high, spiky, often decorated with buttons, buckles, studs, and straps, were found only in specialty shops or worn by showgirls. And this was a great comparison that I had. This pair of high, well over thigh-high red boots from the early 20th century with Christian Louboutin's interpretation of that. But if your tastes ran to fetish-style heels in the 50s and before, you could also watch films like this clip that I'll show you from the 50s of pinup queen Betty Page. Just so many videos of Betty just putting on her stockings and heels. Nothing else happens. And she can't walk in them because they're too big. Now, such designs have entered into the mainstream, bringing with them the thrill of the taboo. Not these are not mainstream. Louboutin's heels, of course, frequently traffic in the suggestions of bondage or fetishism. Many of them, of course, have super spiky heels and aggressive studs. But he actually directly explored fetishism in a series of extreme heels, like this one called the ballerina fetish, not made for walking or for general sale, that were actually displayed in a gallery and photographed by the film director and photographer David Lynch. These kind of moody, evocative photos. And you can just see the bottom of one of these photos where a model is wearing those shoes. So this section also highlights how designers have played with the stiletto's essential silhouette, whether stripping the heel completely to reveal the internal weapon-like steel rod, or adding spikes that multiply and mutate and even migrate around the shoe. I love, for example, Iris van Herpen's very radical haute couture creations. In this one, the spikes line the negative space between the heel and the sole, conjuring some sort of, it always made me think of a razor-toothed prehistoric sea creature or something, their mouth. And then in another instance of a shoe belonging or associated with a famous person, this shoe, which was designed by United Nude for Lady Gaga to wear for one of her perfume launches. And naturally, it's in the fetish section because it's got little gold naked men pressing themselves against it. So I want to pause here just for a moment to mention that the 6 short films that we commissioned for the exhibition were not meant to correspond with the 6 themes that I was developing, that I'm in the middle of talking about as part of the shoe checklist. Because commissioned work can take a while, working with contemporary artists, and it was happening at the same time that I was working out my themes, I kept it very, very open. And I simply asked the artists to create a short film that took the high heel as their conceptual or thematic starting point. We knew that each of the commissioned films would have its own viewing room and be projected rather large, and that these rooms would be spread out over the entire exhibition floor plan. They were meant to be these sort of provocative interludes that visitors would encounter as they moved throughout the space, looking at shoes and then looking at the videos. But as it happened, several of the films ended up having really interesting connections to the adjacent thematic space where they were running. Rashad Newsom's really exuberant film, Not, for example, combines the artist's interest in heraldic symbols of rank and position with contemporary hip-hop culture in a visually and musically exciting exploration of gender and sexuality. His film, in which glamorous queer performers, to use the artist's word, vogue in their Louboutins, was perfectly placed near the glamour and fetish section and its exploration of how heels are used in the construction of femininity. It also made an intriguing comparison with Some Like It Hot, which we just saw, which also features men performing in heels. So here's a brief clip from Rashad's commissioned film.
Ooh, that's a problem. The way I work the hook, make your favorite singer past tense. Now let the prodigy commence.
The one are you having? It's confidence. Step in the room, not having it. Dress to impress from head to toe. Further it says you already know. Stepping on the runway, breaking up the floor. Avalanche, coming through the door. This is how it looks. This is how it feels when you're serving and you want your killer heel. Work cat, give it to me. Work cat, serve it to me.
You got to really see the whole thing. I mean, the little clips don't do it justice. Rashad and his troupe actually did a live performance during our opening, which was amazing. And this little video enclave was always filled with people dancing. It was great. So also well placed near the Glamour and Fetish section was fashion photographer Stephen Klein's provocative film, which encapsulates the dark allure of the spiked and fetishized killer heel. And I warn you, because when I ran through this before, I was told that the sound of this video was not dissimilar to nails on a chalkboard. So if that sound bothers you, you've gotten fair warning. So when, it was really funny because when we had this film running, men would go in and would be, oh my God, the car. And women would go in and be, oh my God, the heels. So it was really, again, like nice gender divide there. The section called Architecture considers the relationship between that practice and elevated shoes. Architecture and shoe design share some concerns: enclosure, protection, harmonized solids, voids, and silhouettes, and a balance of material, form, and function. Structural issues of stress points, loads, and flexion make the comparison even more compelling when it comes to high heels. One stiletto in this section is even called Skyscraper, which I loved. The heels in this section borrow architectural elements or motifs and were displayed against a background of urban photographs with several chairs from our collection and other structurally evocative objects placed near them. It's a great little comparison. That's the Pierre Hardy Skyline shoe and a Fendi shoe and this amazing 1930s part of a tableware setting it was like the skyscraper setting, basically. Some of the heels feature a cantilever configuration, an architectural form used in bridge and balcony construction. In place of a vertical element at the rear of the shoe, a support extends horizontally, like a strut, which gives the appearance that the heel of the foot is unsupported. And this design looks as gravity-defying in contemporary high heels by Marc Jacobs as it did when it was first introduced in the 1920s. So, nothing is new in fashion. There are also, in this section, heels designed by architects who have brought the processes of their discipline to bear directly on high heel design to create really new and unexpected typologies. This is Zaha Hadid's dynamically cantilevered heel. This shoe is by Julian Hakes, who is an architect and a bridge engineer. And other shoes in this section sort of were evocative of sharp edge, geometric, referencing the contours and even colors of the built urban skyline. This, by the way, is the skyscraper heel. It's a good 6 inches here. Now, one of the themes that I knew from the very beginning that would figure prominently in the exhibition was this idea of metamorphosis. One of the sections is called Metamorphosis. In a general sense, high heels transform the women who wear them. They appear taller, their entire posture changes. The chest is thrust forward, the derriere is lifted, the leg looks longer, the calf more taut and rounded, and the foot smaller. You all know this. These temporary body modifications create the distinctive silhouette and gait that for centuries and in different cultures have signified alluring femininity and stimulated the erotic imagination. Many of the shoes in this section had a strong connection to the dreamlike or unexpected juxtapositions and transformations of surrealism, like you can see Celine's fur-covered stiletto. One of the key objects in this section isn't even a shoe, however. It is Elsa Schiaparelli's 1930 shoe hat, which is a hat made in the shape of an inverted high heel. Now, another noteworthy object in this section was a pair of the lotus slippers worn for centuries by Chinese women with bound feet. Astonishingly tiny, and you really don't realize until you see them in person. To me, they sort of forcefully and very explicitly communicate the relationship between shoes and physical transformation. Many of the other shoes in this section express hybrid forms or states of flux, transition, or mutation. This shoe, for example, by Iris van Herpen, this massive interwoven tendrils reaching toward the ground, evoked for me the classical nymph Daphne in that story from Metamorphosis, when her feet became roots as she was transformed into a laurel tree. On other shoes, heels spiral into leaves or flowers, or they're stretched to the exaggerated proportions of mutation in progress. Heels embellished with feathers, fur, or animal skins conjure mythological hybrids, hunting trophies, or garments worn to perform transformational spiritual rituals, perhaps. Shoes that resemble hooves, and this is only one of the shoes in the show that resembled hooves, made me think of these words that I read I encountered them in my research, written by a comparative anatomist in 1781, because, you know, anatomists and physicians and people concerned with the body were already railing against high heels, you know, centuries ago and how bad they were. And he wrote, wealthy women walk by reason of the height of their heels on the forends of their feet, and consequently very badly. They walk like the majority of quadrupeds on their toes only. And this seems also to imply to the purposefully impossible heels you'll see in this next clip that wasn't a commissioned film. It was a film that an artist named Leni Van de Viver made a year or so ago, had a pair of shoes made, and then made this short film. And the short film is called Scary Beautiful. So another artist in the show, Sputniko, made high heels in collaboration with a shoe designer that actually served a purpose. They were meant to transform the contaminated soil around the damaged Fukushima nuclear facility. And as seen in this little brief clip I'm going to show you, the heels were designed to plant the seeds of a flower that absorbs radiation from the soil with every step taken. So it's sort of an altruistic heel. And here's a little video of the mechanism. Oh, whoops. I didn't want to go back to that. I think we skipped one. Saw that. Well, this finish and see. Let me just go quickly through. Oh, okay. We seem to be missing a slide. Anyway, I'll tell you, it's a slide of, we had glass slippers in the show, of course. As I mentioned before, late 17th century was when Charles Perrault wrote Cinderella. And when he wrote that tale, no mention, if you read it, is actually made of a heel of any substantive height. They're called glass slippers. But when Walt Disney released Cinderella in 1950, which was at the dawn of the stiletto era, the glass slippers that turned a maid into a princess looked more like stiletto high-heeled shoes, which again powerfully reinforces the belief that high heels are these enchanted and transformative objects. So the film we commissioned from fashion filmmaker Nick Knight was shown adjacent to the Metamorphosis section, which was another really happy coincidence, because using one of the glass stilettos that we had in the show, he had actually had that specially made for his film, so it was great that we could have both of them there. And in his film, he's exploring the very uneasy fusion of foot and shoe at the intersection of fantasy, pleasure, and pain. Not that, this. This film because the music makes it sound like a horror movie by the end. So the last section, Spacewalk, features heels whose futuristic and retro-futuristic shapes and materials appear drawn from the worlds of space travel and science fiction. Innovative design and fabrication technologies like 3D printing or rotational molding, and unconventional shoe materials like carbon fibers, plastics, allow contemporary designers to achieve fluid or faceted shapes suggestive of spacecrafts or interstellar travel, imagining a gravity-defying future in high heels. Here, for example, this shoe here was part of United Nude's, it was a modular shoe called the Moon Life shoe, and you see how it looks put together, and these are all of the component parts of the shoe laid out. It was part of a project to design things for traveling and living in space that would be easy, because you need a platform shoe when you're traveling and living in space. Streamlined jet age design influenced Prada's retro-futuristic mules, ornamented with those fabulous 1950s style car taillights. And I paired them with this delightful mid-century satellite jumping shoe, which is the children's version of elevated footwear, and also must have been the cause of countless broken bones and skinned knees. But it shares that same sort of futuristic aesthetic. A number of the designs also feature aerodynamic lines, transparent, metallic or reflective surfaces, white or a silver palette. Many others resemble machine parts or the augmentations and armatures associated with robots or cyborgs. That was what was going on in this section. Now, the filmmaker Zach Gold, who was one of our commissioned artists, he was no doubt influenced by kind of sexy pulp science fiction imagery. I always think Barbarella when I saw his film, so I'll show you this little clip from it. So this was one of my favorite conversations between old and new in this section. It's Ferragamo's iconic 1947 invisible sandal, which was a curved wedge heel with an upper formed by a single strand of nylon filament that combined innovative materials, nylon was very new, with a minimalist aesthetic. And you can see the influence of its light aerodynamic style in young designer Tamar Arashezi's shoe that she calls Walking on Air, which rests on a platform of curved plexiglass. So in the 1980s, 90s, and through to the present day, high heels or power heels, like these pop-inspired shoes playfully proclaim themselves to be, have remained part of a professional woman's office wardrobe. How high such heels should be, however, is still a question that raises issues surrounding perceptions of femininity, power, and ability, as a recent article in Forbes wondered with the headline, "To Heel or Not to Heel?" In Ghada Amir and Reza Farkanda's commissioned film, which is called Hire Me, and I'm going to play you a little clip, an extremely low vantage point is combined with the voices of people sort of talking at the same time, all describing how they feel about and in high heels, creating a kind of subtle and immersive meditation on power and perception.
They are a gender-defining object.
Once you step into them and you're raised up, I definitely
Beautiful
feel
and feminine. They can make you feel very
stronger,
feminine.
bolder,
they can make
more
you feel
confident.
very empowered.
Ordinarily, I like feeling comfortable and my feet on the ground.
It's a pedestal, so to speak.
From a woman's point of view, you
I
know
don't
the kind of pain
see
that
them
she's
as
in when she's
functional
wearing those heels
footwear.
all day.
You can't
So
run
that's
in
what
them.
I think
They're
of.
dangerous.
She can wear those heels
You have to be
all
careful
day,
where you walk.
walking around, conducting meetings. She's a strong
Anything
woman.
over like 4 inches, or it's kind of ridiculous.
Love the feeling of being grounded when
There's a kind of
I
a duality where a woman is vulnerable and she is
A
at
woman
the same time powerful.
should be able to feel powerful.
So in our post-Sex and the City world, high heels show no signs of going away. The cultural meanings and messages of high heels and the values and motives ascribed to the women who wear them are still contested. As I was working on the exhibition a few years ago, there was a Twitter tempest when the male CEO of a startup tweeted a picture of the stiletto-shod feet of a woman he saw attending a technology conference, accompanied by a WTF and the hashtag brains not required. Around the same time, Time magazine put out this cover. And although the heel here is only of modest height, especially compared to those we've seen tonight, the image's intelligibility still relies on the common trope of men being crushed under the killer heels of a dangerous and domineering woman. Hillary. So, laden with so much historical baggage, the high heel can never be neutral. This is fully understood by all women who choose to wear them, whether they do so to express power and control, to radically transform their bodies in support of or opposition to codes of femininity or sexual desirability, or to play with and perform conventional, transgressive, or other identities. And on that note, I just want to show you a clip from the really mesmerizing and beautiful film that the artist Marilyn Minter made for the Killer Heels exhibition called Smash. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lisa. We do have a couple of minutes. What an extraordinary talk. I mean, just fabulous. If anybody has a question or comment or wants to involve themselves in conversation, I have one right here in the front.
That was fantastic. Thanks so much. I have a question about the older shoes. How were they kept and what was done to preserve them? Because some of them look so like refined and beautiful.
Right, right. Well, I mean, the first thing that's interesting, right, is that the shoes that are preserved are the nice shoes. You know, the shoes that ordinary people wore or farmers or whatever, they don't really exist so much because those were worn, you know, into the ground. So they come down to us in a variety of ways. Some shoes are literally passed on, you know, through families. They're kept as sort of treasured objects, so they're always kept very nicely. And then they pass into public, you know, collections perhaps, or private collections. So they're cared for in that way.
I have another question right here in the front for you, Lisa.
Hello, I'm over here.
Oh, where? I can't, the light's shining in me.
Will designers ever make shoes that are really comfortable?
Plenty of designers make shoes that are comfortable. You know, I think that when we had the exhibition on, we had a program at the museum with Christian Louboutin, and somebody asked him that question, or he said that he gets asked that question all the time, like, you know, why don't you make your shoes to be comfortable? And he basically said, comfort is not of interest to me. In the design of the kinds of shoes that he's making, you know, I think they're about something else. I mean, sure, they're well made, and to the extent that they can be made comfortable in terms of the cushioning or the structure, the engineering, where the heel is and the stability, they can be more or less comfortable or tolerable, maybe a better word for many people. But you know, it's one of those kind of artificial fashion items that doesn't serve a purpose anymore other than what it says about itself. You know, it's not a purposeful object unless your purpose is to be taller or, you know, to say something else. So comfort is not really at the forefront when it comes to this type of shoe. So you either choose to wear them and, you know, deal with it or don't, I guess.
Here's a question right in the middle.
Yeah.
I'd never thought before tonight about this, but we saw Louis the Sun King with his red heels.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an intentional line between that and Christian de Louboutin and the red soles?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something that's brought up a lot because it does seem that way. I mean, certainly Louboutin, you know, knew about the red heels. That's really rather famous. But Louboutin says that the genesis of his red heel really came about because when he had one of his earliest prototypes and he was looking at the design and he was in his atelier and, you know, he liked it, but there was just something and he didn't know what. And, you know, I don't know to what extent this is apocryphal, but this is actually what he said, that there was one of his fit models or something was giving herself a manicure. She was polishing her nails with red nail polish. And he, you know, had this brainwave and he took the nail polish and just started painting the sole of the prototype red and had that sort of eureka moment that's what gave it the, you know, the pop. You know, in the catalog, I refer to the red sole, you know, red, the color of blood and lust and all of that conveys. So I think we can see a lineage or we can make a lineage, but I don't think it's necessarily purposeful. Because remember, Louis' heels were red heels for men. And, you know, Christian does make shoes for men with red soles, but I don't think the lineage is exactly one, you know, A to B.
We'll take two more questions over there.
Another one over here.
Oh, yeah.
40 years ago at my bar mitzvah, I wore a pair of high-heeled, three-tone saddle shoes.
Excellent.
Your husband was there. And I'd like to know what the likelihood of my being able to buy a new pair of shoes like that and have it be fashionable in my lifetime.
In your lifetime? Okay. You know, I can't foretell the future. You know, I think that if you wanted to buy a pair of those shoes right now, there'd be places that you could buy them. You know, you think in terms of stores that specialize in kinky boots and that sort of clientele. You know, you can get platform and other high shoes in big sizes. But, you know, I don't know. I mean, one can say that since they were in style for men at one point, and fashion is cyclical, if nothing else, as we've seen, maybe they will come back into style. You know, I honestly, if I had to put money on it, I really don't know. I mean, you shouldn't have gotten rid of those shoes. Well, they wouldn't fit you anymore, but could pass them down.
Last question is right here in the middle, Lisa.
Yeah.
So did you secretly get to try on any of those shoes?
I was waiting for somebody to ask me that. I think that's the question that I got asked the most during the run of the exhibition when I would give tours. And the simple answer is absolutely not. Because the shoes that were in the show, I mean, certainly the historical shoes that came in, those are artifacts. And the minute they cross the threshold of the museum, you know, they are, you hold them with gloves on and you treat them very, very delicately. The irony was that many of the contemporary shoes that we borrowed directly from the designers, I would go to pick them up and they'd be in shoe boxes, in a bag, you know, and I'd bring them to our registrar and they would have like mini heart attacks because, you know, of the way that the designers themselves would handle the shoes. So no, I mean, it's kind of like saying, you know, in a collection of other kinds of objects, would you try on like historic costume or something? So the sad answer is no, I did not. But I always made special note of what size every shoe was coming in. And when it came in, it was my size. I had a sort of wistful, oh yeah, that's my size.
So I want to remind you the fabulous exhibition book is available through our box office, edited by Lisa, essay by Lisa. She will sign it in the atrium. What an extraordinary evening. Thank you so much,
Thank
Lisa
you.
Small.
Thank
Thank you for coming.